let's say we have an array containing some data on a few cities. It contains the name, the population, and the country that the city belongs to. How can we print out the names of all the cities in this array? At first, you might be thinking of doing something like this. You might want to add a for loop directly within the JSX code, something like this. But you can see that the syntax highlighting is not working properly because this is not syntactically correct. You can't put a for loop within the JSX code. And the reason for that is this code will be converted into a function call. So to create a UL element, React will do this. React.createElement. And this is the type. The first parameter is the type. And then the props, which doesn't have props. And then just imagine we're putting this for loop within this function call. And you know that this is not a proper argument. You can't pass a for loop to a function. So that's the reason why that won't work. But what we can do is we can move out that for loop here. And here we can just say, let's create an item which will have an li element and then the current member, and then we're going to have the name here. And then we're going to be pushing this to an array. So let's create an array called cities list. And let's push this item to cities list. Now we can just print cities list. This is an array, and an array is just a perfectly fine argument to a function. So we can do this. And let's see what we have. And we're printing the names of the cities properly. Now this is perfectly fine. We can just use a for loop, or you can just use a different type of for loop as well. But I prefer to use the map method for this, which will simplify things quite a lot. So instead of going through the array with the for loop, let's just do this cities data.map, and this will take parameter, city parameter, and now we're going to be able to do the same thing we did. Just print out the name of the city. Now this is going to be converting the cities data array into an array that contains these elements, which contain the name of the city. Now we can see that it is still working properly. We can even inline this and move this directly inside our JSX code. Again, this returns an array, so it's a perfectly fine argument for a function. And we can see that it's still working. Now, if we open the console here, we can see that React is giving us a warning. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So this is our list here, and these are the children. So each child should have a unique key prop, is what React is telling us. So now we have the ID here, and I set them to be unique. Now let's just set the key prop of each of the children in this list to their ID. Now we can just see that the warning is gone. What we did is just to set the key prop to the ID prop here. You might be wondering why we need to set keys in lists, or why we didn't just use the index as the key. I will explain that in detail soon in another episode, so stay tuned and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter at RNcasts.com. Now let's set a few more things to the list. Let's also show the population and the country, and I'll quickly do that behind the scenes to speed things up. And here we go. Now this still doesn't look too complicated. We're just printing the name, the population, the country, and we can just see that name, population, and country. And it's still pretty simple, so it's not a big deal. But as these things get bigger, they pollute our JSX code. So it's better to refactor these to make it easier to read. Now, the first step you can take is to just move this outside just the way we were doing before. So let's just call this cities list again, and then assign this, what we had, to an array. So the JSX code is still easy to read. We can just see that there's a div, and then it just contains the cities list, and that stays in another part of the code, so it's a bit easier to read, and we can see that it's still working properly. And the next step you can take is to just move these out to their own component. So let's do that. Let's create another component called city item. Let's import React. And we'll just create a constant city item. Here, let's do this. Let's just copy this. It will just print a city item. This will be our city item. Now we need to print these values: city.name, city population, city country. And where do we get these from? So we can just pass the city as a prop to this component. So let's say we have a city prop here. And here, let's just import our city item component and pass city as a prop. Now what we did was we just took that code out, and then we just put it in its own component. Now it's more granular, and it's arguably easier to read and understand. This code is much simpler now. We know that it goes through the cities list, and it just creates a city item with the data we have, and then it prints it out. And if someone is curious about how the city item works, they can just go inside that component and see what it actually does. And now if you look at the component again, we can see that it works just the same. But you can see that again, we get the warning. So let's add a key prop again, and let's call it city ID. And it's working properly. So the key is not going to be within the new component anymore, because this is not a list. This knows nothing about the list. This just knows that it is a city item. And even though the city item component doesn't have a key prop, we can just add it here. This is sort of a special prop that we can use. All right, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed it and found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one.